All right, we are jumping back in this morning to our series called The Storyteller, where we've just been walking through some parables of Jesus, some of the stories that he told. And we began last week on this series of parables within the parables. Have this very specific focus. They're kind of known as the parables of redemption. Last week we talked about the two of them, the lost sheep and the lost coin. And the third in that series is the lost son, or the prodigal son, as you might be more familiar with that title, the prodigal son. It's again, I feel like each week I've been saying, this is one of Jesus' most popular parables in terms of most well-known that has transcended, the realm of Christianity, and is actually in pop culture. You hear this phrase a lot. And I think that says something, right? We had the Good Samaritan, which is a very common term now. And we had, the lost sheep. Jesus leaves the 99 to find the one. And these are things that have kind of transcended the realm of Christianity and have been kind of adopted in, larger culture. And I think that there's a reason for that. And again, as we talked about the first week, the reason Jesus tells these stories, the reason he teaches in parables is because they are easy to connect to. Regardless of your experience with God, regardless of your, how deep or how shallow your religious practice is, these stories can still speak to you. I feel like they speak in a way that while it does use some, we use the term here, Christianese. Well, it does use some of that. It doesn't use it to the extent that people who don't have that perspective won't understand what's going on. And I think that's the beautiful thing about the way these parables are told. So last week, the title of the sermon was The God Who Pursues. This week, the title of the sermon is The God Who Waits. Actually, I think it was The God Who Seeks. I should remember that. I titled it. The God Who Seeks was last week. This week is The God Who Waits. And it's interesting to me that there's these three stories that Jesus tells back to back to back. And you would think that the way that God reacts in each of these stories would be the same. But I think it's interesting that in the first two stories, Jesus tells about a God who pursues, he seeks, he actively goes after those who are lost. But in this story, we see God respond differently to the situation. He doesn't go out and seek, but he actually waits. So let's dive in and we'll get more specific on this. So Luke chapter 15, verses 11 through 32, but we'll stop and kind of dissect some of this as we go. Luke chapter 15, starting in verse 11. Jesus continued, "There was a man who had two sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all that he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living." Let's stop right here for a sec. So there's a lot of cultural context that's involved here. I think sometimes we put a little too much emphasis on some of those cultural aspects, and here's one thing that I've heard often related to this particular part of the story. The son comes to his father and says, "Give me my share of the inheritance." Now, essentially, what would happen in that time period is when the father passed away, that is when the sons would receive their inheritance. And so when the son comes to the father and says, "Father, give me my share of the inheritance now," there are some who would say that what the son is saying is, "I wish you were dead." Now, I've heard this a lot. I've heard it over and over. Now, I don't think that that's wrong. I do think there is some truth to that, but I think it's often overemphasized. It's overemphasized in terms of the relationship between the Son and the Father. I don't think that fully the Son is saying, I wish you were dead. I think there's two things that the Son wants here. The things that the Son is seeking is distance and means. Distance and means. When the story starts, we don't know what kind of home life the Son had. We don't know the relationship between the Son and the Father. There's all this like potential context, this potential like relational stuff that's going on that we don't know. And we can, we can like hypothesize about it, but that's all that it is a hypothesis. We just don't have that context. We don't know the relationship between the Son and the Father. All we know is that for whatever reason, the Son wanted distance from his family and the means to support himself. He wanted distance from his family and the means to support himself. The reason that I bring this up is I'm not sure if the Son was lost when he left, right? I don't know if he left under the circumstances of like, I don't want anything to do with my father and my family anymore. I'm leaving my religion. I'm leaving my family. I'm leaving all this behind. It wouldn't be necessarily unfair to come to that conclusion, but I think it's just we might be reading a little too much into it if we immediately jump to that. It could be that the Son was just like, I just need to get away. You ever been there? Like, have you ever been there with your with your family where you're just like, I don't hate you guys. I just need to get away, right? I just need some distance. And I need the means to support myself. And so the only way I'm going to get that is if I get my inheritance now. Now, it could very well be that like the understood part of like, I hate my family and I need to get away and I wish you were dead. It could be that was there, but I think it's fair for us to consider that maybe it wasn't that extreme in the beginning. I don't know how lost the Son was when he left, but he certainly got there in a hurry, right? He left under whatever the circumstances were, and then he went and he squandered his wealth in wild living. It could be that he left not under duress, but whatever it was, he got there pretty quickly. He got there pretty quickly to this place of just being lost and having nothing. Here's what I do think that we can glean from this. We talked last week about the fact that in the first two stories of lostness, the Father's patience was on display. Right? We talked about the story of the lost sheep where he goes and he finds this lost sheep, and instead of like, whipping it into shape and driving it back to the flock, he picks it up, he puts it on his shoulders, and he gently restores it. He shows immense patience in doing this, and it's a picture of the Father's patience. And I think what we see here is that the patience of the Father is on display again. What immediately stands out to me is that the Father lets him go. He just lets him go. There's no argument. There's no fight. The Son comes and he says, I want my inheritance. I want some distance. And the Father's like, all right. He just lets him go. He doesn't try to do everything he can to keep him there, knowing that if he goes, there's a chance that he loses himself. It seems that his patience is being put front and center again, but this time, not by gently pursuing and restoring, but by just waiting. Just waiting. He lets the Son go, and he doesn't go after him. He doesn't run after him. He just waits. We'll see more about that as we go. Let's read the next few verses, 14 through 19. It says this. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am, starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.'" We'll just stop there for a second. So the thing that I immediately notice in this passage is that the shame that the son feels is great. The shame is great. He immediately knows what he did. He knows, I blew it. I had everything. I had all of this. I had my share of the inheritance. Not only that, but if I would have just stayed, I had everything I needed there. The shame that he's feeling is great. Now, here's where it could be a helpful exercise to kind of fill in the gaps of this story based on what we know about how relationships work. Now, I know I'm kind of going back and forth here because at the beginning I was like, there's no need to really like fill in the gaps. Like they're not there, so we can't really make assumptions. I don't think that, I think that's a principle that we should always first consider. But then I think it's also okay to be like, all right, like Jesus is telling a story here. Let's kind of practice this exercise of filling in the gaps of just what we know about how relationships work. In all likelihood, there were some conversations that were had between the father and son, right? Like, I mean, those of you who are parents or those of you who are children of parents, like, you can imagine this scenario of a child going to a father, a parent, and saying like, "Hey, I need to leave. I need to get out of here. And I want you to give me some money so that I can go and do my own thing." And you can imagine how this scenario might go. But there were likely some conversations that were had, conversations about the potential dangers out there, right? Maybe there were some sort of stern warnings about identity, like remember who you are and remember what family you represent when you're out there. Like, how many of you are familiar with these types of conversations in your life? Like, when you go, that's fine, but remember who you are. Remember where you came from. Remember the foundations that you have. It's likely that some of these conversations happened. And so the son, having made the decision to go anyway, and having experienced the opposite of what he wanted, the opposite of what he was looking for, having experienced now this deep sense of need and unfulfillment in his life, is in this place of great shame. Like, I thought I could do this on my own. I thought that I could do this without my father, without my family, without this foundation. I didn't think I needed all that. In fact, like, he's literally wallowing in shame. He's working with pigs, associating himself with things that were seen by his people as completely impure, right? Like, again, this is context we don't necessarily have, but you have to assume that because Jesus was from a Jewish background and he's telling this story, he's telling it from a Jewish perspective. And as we learned the first week, the people that he's talking to are the religious leaders of the day. Like, he's talking to Jewish people. What are pigs to Jewish people? Impure, unclean, do not associate, right? Have no contact with. And yet, this son is so lost. He's in such a bad situation that he's even willing to associate with the thing that is one of the most impure things in his culture. Like, whatever I need to do, I'll do it. I'll go and I'll wallow with the pigs. He's literally wallowing in shame. And he says to himself, like, I had everything I needed at home. Why did I leave? I'm going to go back. He comes up with this plan, right? I'm going to go back and I'm going to tell you. You can imagine him rehearsing this conversation, right? Like maybe he's talking to one of the pigs. I don't know. But he's like rehearsing this conversation. He's like, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Will you just make me like one of your hired servants? It is interesting here. This is one of those like cultural context things that I think is really interesting because this term hired servants, it didn't just mean like when we think of like hired servants at like a, for like a rich person, what we generally think of is like people who live with the rich person and take care of his needs and do everything for the family or whatever. This particular term is more like a day laborer. And so it wasn't like this secure position where you're there day in and day out. It was like you're hired day to day to do particular things for this family. So like work in his fields, whatever. It's a day-to-day position. Like the insecurity here is still there, but he's like, even that would be more secure than what I have right now. If I can just go back to my father and he'll just hire me day to day to do some stuff. Like I don't even need a full-time job. I just need a side gig for my dad. Whatever it takes, I just need something different. He doesn't even need permanence at this point. He's likely completely convinced that his father will not have him back on a permanent basis. He's completely convinced that when he goes back, his father's not going to be like, yeah, come, you're back in the family. No problem. Water under the bridge. He's like, when I go back, the only thing that I even have a shot at is for my dad to be like, yeah, I mean, come back to tomorrow and let's see if we have something for you. But that's not what he experiences when he goes back, is it? Here's what he experiences. Verse 20. So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger, sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate. So the son has these expectations in his mind of what he's going to experience when he comes back to his father. And he goes back. You can imagine him like on the road. I mean, I like to sometimes paint these pictures in my head of these scenes, right? And I think of this really long driveway, right? This walkway, I guess. They didn't have cars. I think this really long walkway from like the main road to the house, the family's house. And he gets to the end of the walkway, and all of a sudden, you have to imagine he's just like hanging his head in shame, probably rehearsing his speech again, right? And he looks up. And we don't know, again, don't know how old the father is, but I just picture this old man just running down the walkway, just sprinting as fast as he can, right? And he shows up and he just embraces. He just embraces the son. There's a couple things here. The first thing that I think is important is that we can't get around the fact that the father in this story was waiting and watching. He was waiting and watching. There's no way he wasn't looking out and just watching for his son to return. The only way he would see his son before he even comes to the house is if he's sitting there waiting and watching. Jesus is certainly making a point by stating that the father saw him when he was far off. He was waiting for this moment. Another thing that stands out immediately is that the Father had no regard for how far the Son had fallen. He's not sitting there calculating and thinking like, well, if he's done this, then I'm not going to welcome him home. If he's done this, then I'm not. If he's done this, maybe we'll let it slide. If he's done this, maybe he's not running through these calculations in his mind. He has no regard for how far the Son had fallen. His only regard is that he came back. There's no sense of like, hey, tell me what you got into. Do you have any money left? What sins did you commit? Give me a list. None of that. He just runs out and he embraces him and says, now we're going to have a party. I'll give you everything. Put a robe on him. Put some rings on him. Bring the fattened calf. We're having a party because this son that was lost is now found. There's also no like petty theological arguments here. He's not like, wait, is that pork I smell? Like there's none of these like there's no checklist of like, I got to make sure you have everything in line before I can embrace you. And again, like Jesus is talking, he's telling this story to a group of people who, like this one group of people would consider, the religious people would consider them lost. They're the tax collectors and the sinners. They're the ones who are far from God, who have turned their backs on God. And then this other audience is the Pharisees, the teachers of the law, the ones who, like the religious leaders. And so to think that Jesus just skirted over this part, like for us, is like, no big deal. For them, it's scandalous. Like Jesus made a point to say this guy was hanging out with pigs. And he makes no point of saying, oh yeah, he washed himself before he came back. It's hugely important that he said that he does things this way. Because he's making a point to the religious leaders to say you are focusing on the wrong things. You are focusing on all of these rules and regulations. You are focusing so much on the law that you're missing the fact that these people, they are wanting to come back to God. They are seeking the Father. You're keeping them from it. You're telling them they don't deserve it. But this is how the Father sees it. No regard for how far he'd fallen. No petty theological arguments. Just this son of mine was lost and is found. Now, there's one last part of this story. And this, I'll tell you this part up front. What he's doing in this last part is he's really sticking it to the religious folks. These religious leaders who have this perspective about how it works, he's sticking it to them in a way that I think can easily be overlooked. And he says this, verse 25. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and he asked them what was going on. Your brother has come, he replied, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound. The older brother became so angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him. My son, the father said, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. Now, there is a radical perspective shift here, right? Like, think about the difference between the younger son and the older son. Think about the difference of perspective that they are experiencing in this moment. The younger son said, I got to get away from here. And I need my share of the money to do it. I need my share of the property to do it. And he leaves, and he goes, and he blows it all. And yet, when he decides to return, he's welcomed back with open arms. Then you have the older brother who did everything right. In his own mind, at least. He had done everything his father had asked. He stayed. He worked for his father. He gave everything he had to his father's business, whatever that was. And then he sees that when his brother, who had blown it, comes home, he just gets whatever he wants. Younger siblings, right? Just gets whatever he wants. The older brother was convinced that his staying, his faithfulness had earned him more of the Father's love. No, I deserve more of my dad's love. I did what he asked me to do. I stayed. I did exactly what I was supposed to do. I've earned it. I've earned his love. Why is he giving all this stuff to my brother who blew it? It goes back to what we talked about last week, where at the end of each of the first two parables here, Jesus said there is more rejoicing for those who have repented than there is for those who have stayed. There's more rejoicing in heaven for someone who is lost and is found than for someone who has never left. We talked about last week how the fact that that's a hard pill to swallow when you're the one who has stayed. Especially when you equate what you have done to faithfulness. Right? When you feel like you have been faithful. I mean, you experience this in relationships, right? Like, there are people in all of your lives, I would imagine, that you feel like you were faithful to, that maybe others in that same kind of group have been unfaithful to in some ways, and yet they still return to that other person. And they don't reward your faithfulness. This is a common human experience, I think. So I think we can relate to this fact of but what did I do this for then? Right? I could have gone out and had fun. I could have gone out and blown all the money and gambling and whatever. I could have done that. But instead I stayed here, and now I'm not even being rewarded for it. And this guy who blew it all is now being given everything he wants. But the Father's response is when you are with me, you have full access to everything I have. Everything I have is yours, and it always has been. We are celebrating because this son who lost that, he lost sight of the fact that everything I had was his, and he wanted something else. And he realized that something else did not fulfill him, and so he returned. He was dead, and now he's alive again. We're going to celebrate. It has nothing to do with you, older son. It has everything to do with the fact that this person who was basically dead to us has been resurrected. We're going to throw a party. We're going to celebrate. Not in a way to say, in your face, older son, but as a way to say, hey, rejoice with me. Aren't you happy? Aren't you happy that this son, your brother, who we thought was as good as dead, is now alive again? Is that not worth celebrating? Now again, imagine the perspective of the religious leaders here. Jesus is sticking it to them. He's saying, your attitude has basically been that God favors me because I do everything right. God favors me because I am righteous. God favors me because I follow the rules. God favors me because I've never done wrong. That's not how things work with God. God does not play favorites. He's not going to just say, yeah, the older son is my favorite because he's never done anything wrong. He's going to rejoice just as much for the one who left and returned. I heard a quote this week. Actually, Chris sent me this little video that had this. It was about the prodigal son, and it had this quote in it that I thought was really good. And it's this: the scandal of grace isn't that God plays favorites, it's that God has no favorites. The scandal of grace is not that God plays favorites. It's that God has no favorites. Another way of looking at this is grace can seem unfair when it's received by others, and even more so if it costs you something. There's another parable that we'll probably get to, so I don't want to go too deep into this, but this isn't a one-time thing that Jesus mentions. He mentions this over and over again in his parables. A lot of his parables use this same kind of idea, which is like, hey, you think that you deserve more because you've been here longer, but that's not how things work with God. His grace is the same for those who have been here their entire lives as it is for someone who enters into his grace on the last day of their lives. He tells this story about these landowners. Maybe I'll just go ahead and say we won't use this parable, and I'll use it right now, okay? He tells this story about this landowner, this guy who he goes out each day and he hires people. So there's this one day when he goes out early in the morning and he hires people, day laborers, to come and work at his farm. He goes out and he hires people early in the day, and they're there all day. And then like a little bit into mid-morning or whatever, he's like, okay, I don't have enough workers. I need to go out and hire some more. And then he goes out and he hires some more. And then noon, whatever, he goes out and he hires some more because he doesn't have enough. And then the end of the evening comes and he's like, hey, we still got a lot of work to get done, but I don't have enough people to do this work. So he goes out and he hires more. And then at the end of the day, he brings each of these groups in individually, and he gives every one of them the exact same wages. And the people who came first are like, are you kidding me? I've been here all day. I've been here all day, and I get the same as someone who's been here for an hour? That doesn't make sense. It's not fair. And in the story, the landowner responds, what business is it of yours how I spend my money? Well, it's no shot on you that I decided to pay this person. He's like, you agreed to this amount. It doesn't matter. It should not matter to you that I paid this person the same as I paid you because it's my money. It's all coming from me. What difference does it make? It's the same perspective here. It's the same perspective. It doesn't matter how long you've been doing this. It doesn't matter, you could have been a Christian for your entire life, since you were 5 years old. And you can get to this place where you're like, man, this person that's a new believer is suddenly experiencing all these blessings that I feel like I never received. It's not fair. Jesus' response to that attitude is that grace is not fair. It was never meant to be fair. It's not fair that any of us should get anything from God. But that's kind of the point. I mean, the truth is, when you think about the perspective of this story, the father has the most difficult task of all. Right? Think about the position the father is in this story. He probably knows that if he does what he wants to do for the younger son, if he lavishes upon him, he probably knows, older son's not going to like this very much. He has the most difficult task of all, as welcoming the prodigal home immediately created another prodigal who is now angry at both his brother and his father. The truth is, the father has the most difficult task of all in this because all of the anger is going to come on him. The negative energy, the positive energy, it's all coming to him. He's the one who's going to have to shoulder it all. And yet, knowing that, he still chooses to lavish his love on the ones who don't deserve it and on the one who thinks he does. At the same time, the same amount of love, the same amount of grace for both of them. Now, there's a few different ways that this story can land for you today. Maybe you find yourself in the position of relating to the younger son more. You're like, I've been through this exact same experience. I had it all. I was raised, to believe this stuff, and I gave it all up. And so I experienced the welcoming embrace of the Father when I returned. I've experienced that. And I've even experienced the anger of the ones who stayed. I've experienced all of it. Maybe that's you. And I would ask you, how has it changed you? How has it changed the way that you see people? How has it changed the way that you see people who are far from God? Has it made you the kind of person who, when you see this experience happen, when you witness this experience happen, has it made you the kind of person that is willing to openly embrace someone that even you thought was as far from God as anyone can be and could never return? Can you glean from your own experience with grace and offer that grace to people in your own life? Maybe you relate more to the older son. Showing my cards, I guess. Maybe for you, you have moments where you feel like you have put in the work. Where you're like, I've done it. I've done it all. I've done everything that I feel like the Father has asked. It's not out of pride that it makes me feel this way. It's out of anger about my pride. Does that make sense? I have no reason to feel that way. Maybe you can relate to this. Like, this is speaking to me personally because I know what it feels like to believe that I deserve more. But to know in this moment that I don't deserve anything. I've been given far more than I deserve already. Maybe it speaks to you that same way. Where you're like, I feel like I've done everything asked of me. Shouldn't I be experiencing more of what God has promised? Wherever we find ourselves, we all need this wake-up call from the context of this story. And the wake-up call is that none of it is about us. None of it is about us. Whether we've blown it all or whether we've been faithful, either way, we're putting it on ourselves. But the story is not about us. The story is about the grace of God. It's about the goodness and grace of God who wants you to have everything that is available to you in Him. Whether you've been lost and have been found again, or whether you've stayed, He wants you to have it all. We're going to move into a time of communion. We do this each week at Cultivate. We invite everyone to come. There's no requirement to come. But we believe that in this moment, we believe that we can have this one-on-one time with Jesus. And we take the bread, which represents His body broken for us, and we dip it in the juice, which represents His blood spilled for us. And we take with an attitude of surrender, of surrendering our own ideas of how the world should be, surrendering our own notions of what we deserve, surrendering that to Jesus Himself, who gave up all of it. He gave it all up. He had everything, and He gave it all up to experience what it is that we experience, to experience death, to experience pain, to experience heartache, to experience all of this for the sake of being able to relate to His people, and being able to say, I have gone through everything that you have gone through. And then He died in a gruesome way, and then He was resurrected to show us that death does not have the final word, but the grace of God always gets the final word. So I invite you today to come and to take and to experience that very thing. Let me pray, and we'll sing and we'll take. Father God, we thank You that wherever we are, no matter how far we are, or no matter how close we feel, that You are waiting for us. You are waiting for us to come to You, to surrender to You, to experience an overflow, an abundance of Your grace and love for us. Father, I simply ask that we would experience that this morning. Remind us of Your love. Remind us of Your grace. Remind us that we are never too far away. It's in Jesus' name. Amen. You guys can come as you're ready.